Welcome to the 1980s car of the decade, the Peugeot 205. Not my words, the words of Car magazine. The 205 was introduced in 1983 and it lived on up until the late 90s. It was a 15-year lifespan of this car, and even 7 years into its life it was still known as the benchmark Super Mini, the one that you had to beat. There was stiff competition back then because, of course, there were many different little cars available, whereas now they're all but dying a death, aren't they? If you think of French cars in the 80s and 90s, you probably think of small, nippy hatchbacks, and this Peugeot 205 was, of course, a great example of one of those. And surprisingly, it was only Peugeot's second attempt at building this kind of car. Now, they had the 104, which had been around a while prior to this car. And of course, they did a fantastic job because this car sold by the absolute bucket load, and by the end of its life, they'd sold 5.3 million of them. To be honest, I've not been driving this car all that long and I'm already in love with it. It really is like a truly quintessential 80s French hatchback. It's got character, it's got flair, and it's just got all of those features that I love about cars of that decade. For a start, the visibility of this thing is brilliant. I mean, just look around me now, like it's glass everywhere. You've got this tiny little A-pillar here, which blocks pretty much none of your vision. And it feels solid and robust. Peugeot were at the top of their game in the 1980s and 90s when it came to building cars that were quality. And long gone were the days of the 1970s. And it just feels like a very mechanical experience. I can hear, when I change gear, I can feel the gear slot into the thing. I feel like I'm actually really controlling those gears. You can hear things like the drive shafts. You have to be smooth with the car because if you let off the throttle suddenly, you'll get like a little jerk because these cars back then, you had to drive them smoothly. They didn't drive smoothly for you. But other than that, it's just a really easy car to drive. It's really modern feeling. Probably the only sort of thing that doesn't feel modern is the fact that this particular car doesn't have power steering. So you do have to put a bit of muscle in when you're driving slowly. I cannot get over how good the ride quality is in this car. It's just super smooth, it's super comfortable. I mean, I'm sat in this really padded, comfortable seat. It's a very standard suspension setup. It's coil springs. The rear suspension was kind of quite clever in this car for packaging reasons, so you could get space in the back. But it is, by all intents and purposes, a normal suspension setup, and yet it's really comfortable. It glides along, it soaks up all the bumps and undulations. It means that this car just is not tiring to drive. It doesn't punish you. It just it looks after you as you cruise along in it. I think it's quite a nice little design, isn't it? It was commonly thought that this car... Oh look, Peugeot garage. It was commonly thought that this car was designed by Pininfarina, but Pininfarina actually only made the convertible version of this car, which is funny, isn't it? Because what did they have to do? Just chop the roof off. That must have been the Sergio Pininfarina's hardest ever job. But they did a good job, the in-house design team. Now, of course, by the time this particular car was built in 1995, it was looking its age somewhat. By then, Peugeot they'd released the 106 years before, and they'd released the 306 not that long before as well. So both of those cars were running up against this car, which had a design, from 15 years before. The thing is, though, they got the design right first time because they really didn't do much with it in terms of facelifts, and I'm kind of glad for that, because can you imagine this car with the front end from like a mid-90s Peugeot rounded front end? It wouldn't look right. Although this is the lowly 1.1 litre petrol car, in terms of the interior it feels quite GTI-ish. They've really designed this interior to feel sporty. Everything is around the driver. You've got this like pod, you've got the instrument cluster in front of you, and then the center console, which is kind of like shaped in such a way that it like encircles you. You've got this lovely 3-spoke steering wheel. Again, this is because I think it's the later car. It's a 90s version. Now, although it does look nice, it does have quite sort of poor quality plastics. Like things do feel a little bit flimsy. Particularly this ashtray feels very cheap and nasty. But some of the buttons, for example, the hazard button and the buttons next to it for the rear windscreen and the fog lights, they feel really nice. They're quite like chunky and positive and pleasing to use. And then in terms of all the instrument cluster and stuff, in this car it's very simple. There's no rev counter, but you don't need a rev counter. When you're a seasoned 80s driver, you just listen out for the engine note and you change gear when need be. And the same goes for the climate controls in the middle. I mean, you've just got 3 circular dials. Very simple. One that controls where the air goes, one controls how much power the air has, and then one that's the temperature of it. That's it. And then there's an old school Clarion sound system, and then all you've really got is a bunch of air vents and then this little handle type thing here for your passenger to grab on when you're hurling it round corners. You've got that sort of classic mid-90s weird patterns on all of the fabric, but it feels plush, it feels like very comfortable. You've got really smooth, soft carpets, and you've even got a little bit of carpet inside the door pocket as well. They didn't skimp out on comfort in this car. This car is the Mardi Gras Special, which when translated doesn't sound quite as good in English, because I think that means like Pancake Day Special. But it lets you know that because there's about 48 different Mardi Gras logos all over this car. It's like spot the logo if you can. It basically gave it electric windows, which are, you can kind of tell that they've been added in to the door pocket, but they're actually in quite a nice spot for your hand to just rest on and drop the windows. You also get a nice little sunroof, but otherwise it's still quite low spec because obviously there's no rev counter. Something else they'd kind of perfected by the 1980s, at least the French had with these kinds of cars, was the practicality in the back. The spaciousness of the boot, which had a lot of room because of that trick rear suspension, but also the fact that you could fold the seats flat, and they really were flat, with the base of it coming up and providing lots of room for stuff. So, you know, these cars, they are like a little van. And of course, there was a little van version of this car available as well. But in the 80s, what they didn't have right was the sort of practicalities of the little things up front. Now, of course, this car does have a reasonable sized glove box with that same old French problem of it housing the fuse box as well. A couple of little cubby holes, one in front of the gear stick and one down by the right hand side of the driver's wheel. But there were no cup holders because cup holders just were not a thing in the 80s. So I can't blame Peugeot or this car for that. You also can't adjust this steering wheel, it's just fixed in one position. Now fortunately the driving position is really good and I don't really feel like I need to adjust the wheel. Now it doesn't make much sense me going over all of the engines that were available in this car because there were 13 petrol engines over its life and 3 diesel, ranging from 1 litre right up to obviously the 1.9 in the GTI version. And then obviously the diesels, you could get a turbocharged diesel which was very, very good for its time, like very modern, very punchy and also very frugal. So the engine in this car, it is just a 1.1 litre, but it does have 60 horsepower, which, you know what, that's not bad. This car from the mid-90s, and even in the 80s, it had the original engine in this car, 1.1, would have had 55 horsepower. It's pretty good. Like, cars 10 years younger than this would have 60 horsepower from their similar sized engines. So as a result, along with its lightweight, it feels pretty nippy. Surprisingly nice little engine, very smooth, refined, but pokey. But they were all pretty robust engines, you know, right from the day one in the 1980s up until the mid to late 90s. The engines were, when looked after, you know, they were reliable and they were well engineered. So this car, it's not the GTI, it's just your sort of grandma's runabout shopping car. It's the French farmer's car, you know, it's a car to everybody. But what is cool about it is that it does handle quite nicely. You know, obviously this car with its lack of power steering, it means that the steering is quite pleasingly heavy, and it seems to, although it gets lighter at higher speeds, when you then put it into a corner, it seems to then firm up again, and it's got a really nice amount of weight to it, and that gives you like a little bit of feedback to what you're doing with the wheel. And it means that this car, you know, it's a lightweight 80s car, and it's really quite pleasing to drive and hustle around the corners. It's got body roll, it's an 80s hatchback, and of course, as I say, because it's that mechanical experience, you know, you don't feel like you're separated from the experience, you feel like you are part of it. That is something that you just don't really get now unless you buy like a Caterham or something. And now, the part of the video that everyone's been waiting for, it's time to ask Backseat JJ, what does he think of the Peugeot 205? What do you think, Val? What's that, mate? Yeah, it's kind of a shame that Stellantis have kind of bought everything, isn't it? But, you know, I'm sure they're doing a good job. Oh, yeah. Well, back at the 205, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of small cars, am I? Because I'm always kind of cramped up in the back of them. And to be fair to this car, yeah, my knees are in the back of this seat here, but, you know, that's set for JJ's driving position in front of me. So there is room and there's headroom. So although this is the Mardi Gras version and they put the electric windows in, they only put them in the front. So the people in the back, the lowly French farm hands that were in the back of this car, would have to wind the window down manually with their arms like that. You have, of course, got an ashtray because this car was designed in the 80s and it's also French, and smoking is obviously a priority. There is actually 3 seat belts. There's a lap belt for the middle seat, but there isn't a middle seat. It's like you kind of sit on this gap where the seats fold. And yeah, there's not actually that much else back here, so cheers mate, and back to you. Cheers mate, thank you. The 80s and 90s were also a really good time for car adverts. Car adverts were much better then because now they're kind of constrained by these rules of like you can't be shown to be speeding or doing anything that's remotely sort of exciting or dangerous. But all their adverts then were like totally crazy, and I think it was the GTI advert. It was a take on my favourite Bond film, which is The Living Daylights with Timothy Dalton, and it had like a sort of knockoff Timothy Dalton behind the wheel, and he was ragging it through this snowy landscape just like he does in the film. So I recently did a video on the Mercedes 190e, and I said that is a classic car that you could use every day, and I think that this Peugeot 205 is also along that sort of lines. It's a car that it's reliable and you can use it every day, I think, yet it still stands out as something unusual and old and different. And as David, the owner of this car, and I were filming it outside near the crane, you'll see the shots in the B-roll, we had a few people come over to us and just say, oh, that's a lovely car, you know, like people will stop and talk to you about it and they'll say, oh, I used to have one of those. If it's a car that you want, you know, a little bit of attention without having to spend all that much money, I think it's a really good shout for that. So this car, it got a heck of a lot right, didn't it? It's a fun car to drive, and yet it's still comfortable. It's well built and reliable, and it's practical. And it also looks quite nice. Now, obviously that was in the 80s when this car was Car of the Decade, and I think that it does rightly deserve that title. I'm not going to argue with Car Magazine. I think they got that right. There's a lot of things that go into making a good car, and this car got, you know, most of those right. Now, by the 90s, when this particular car was built, it wasn't the Car of the Decade for the 90s, of course. It was outdated by then. But yet it still managed to sell alongside its much more modern brothers of the 106 and the 306. So yeah, I very much enjoyed driving this car, so thank you very much to David for lending it me. And if you've got a car, you know, of any era really, be it the 80s, 90s, right up until sort of modern day, please do get in touch and let me know, and we can get it on this channel. And yeah, if you want to see a video on another car, then please do click up there, and I'll see you in the next video.